little empty in here, but not for long. Here's all the engine components ready to be rebuilt. Alright, so in the last video I completely disassembled this engine, and that's because the piston rings were bad. But while we're at it, I decided I might as well replace all of the bearings and everything. So that's why the crankshaft's out, and the only thing left to remove is the old crankshaft bearings. To remove these bearings, I always use a small plastic tool. We're replacing them anyway, but I still like to be as careful as possible. Damaging the engine block over something this simple would be a pretty expensive mistake. Then it's just a matter of thoroughly cleaning the bearing saddles before the new bearings can go in. Alright, time to install the new bearings, and I got some ACL bearings and I've never used them before, but they were recommended to me by multiple people, so I believe this is the best option. One thing I don't show on camera is that I always clean the back of each bearing before installing it. Then it's just a matter of gently pressing them into place and making sure they're perfectly centered. Now, if I'm honest, I feel like these bearings look super nasty, I guess, because they look so different from the new bearings I normally use on Volvo engines. But this is what they're supposed to look like, but they look a bit dirty or something. I don't know if you get what I mean, but looks different. Now I know these aren't main bearings, these are conrod bearings from a Volvo engine I normally do, but they look so much cleaner than these ACL bearings. But yeah, they're both new, but they look super different, aside from the fact that these are conrod bearings again. And yes, I'm using the same plastic tool again. This time it's just to give the bearings a couple of gentle taps and make sure they're sitting exactly where they should. Since the crankshaft will be turning directly in these bearings, I always coat them with engine oil before putting it in. Alright, I think you know the drill by now, because I'm going to do the exact same to these bearing caps. If you told me a few years ago that I'd be rebuilding an engine like this in my own garage, I honestly wouldn't have believed you. Back then I was just happy if I managed to replace a timing belt without a mistake. Alright, bearings are in place, which means we can go and put these caps back on. But before final assembly, I do want to make sure, extra, that the clearances are correct. So I got some Plastigauge to measure the clearance, and then we'll know 100% sure that these are the correct fit. To double check the bearing clearances, I'm using Plastigauge. It's basically a thin plastic strip that gets placed on the crankshaft before the bearing caps go back on. Since we're only measuring the clearance, the bearings stay completely dry for now. Once all the caps are in place, I torque everything down to the factory specification. And now I can remove the bearing caps again to check the clearances. By comparing the flattened Plastigauge to the reference chart, I can check whether the bearing clearances are within specification. Alright, Alright, so all of the clearances turn out to be correct, as expected, but better safe than sorry. So I'm just going to clean everything up, put some oil on the crankshaft this time, and then I'm going to finally actually assemble it. This is honestly my favorite part of rebuilding an engine. Everything has been measured, cleaned and checked, so now it's simply a matter of putting it all back together one step at a time. It's funny how different building an engine feels compared to taking one apart. During disassembly, you're always wondering what you'll find next. During assembly, every part that goes back on is a step closer to hearing it run again. Okay, crankshaft's in place and it's turning so smoothly, which makes me genuinely happy because now we can continue with the rest. And if you're noticing, yes, I accidentally kicked off my license plate, but I'll fix that later. It does look cooler now, so it's a win. Now, even though I tried my best to restore every single small part and detail on my CRX, there's two parts I couldn't do because of a lack of time, and that's these two engine mounts, and they look super ugly and rusty, so I think now's the time to finally fix these. One of the things I enjoy most about rebuilding an engine is taking care of all those little details. These engine mounts have been bothering me ever since I put the car back together 2 years ago, so now's the perfect time to finally make them look the way they should have from the beginning. As always, I start by sanding everything down and giving it a good wipe with the greaser before it's ready for paint. By the way, I'm using Hammerite because I did repaint the engine mount on the back side of the engine last time, and I used this paint because that engine mount was a bit rusty and you can spray this directly over rust. So I'm using it for this too, even though I could have used any other black paint, but that's why I'm going for Hammerite now. Alright, I'm sitting on the floor because my workbench is full and also because it's super hot and the floor is cold. But next part I'm going to go and install is the oil pump. But before we can put this back on, I'm going to replace this little seal. So I'm going to do that and then I can finally put it in place now that the crankshaft's there too. Also, fun fact, I'm using the original Honda seal and it already has some lube on the inside. I think that's funny. It came out of the package like this. I first clean the sealing surface before installing the new one. I always start by pressing it in by hand to make sure it's sitting nice and straight. Then, using a socket extension and a few dental taps with a hammer, I work my way around the seal until it's fully seated. With the new seal in place, it is time to clean the mating surfaces of both the oil pump and the engine block. Also, I'm going to use Honda Bond, original liquid gasket for this oil pump, and it's a super big tube. So I think I gotta do more Hondas in the future because it would be a waste of Honda Bond otherwise, and it's expensive too. With everything cleaned up, I apply a thin, even layer of Honda Bond to the engine block before putting the oil pump back in place and torquing it down. Then it's on to the oil seal at the other end of the crankshaft. This one's quite a bit bigger and unfortunately it also puts up a much bigger fight. It takes a couple of different attempts, but eventually it comes out. Thankfully, installing the new seal is a whole lot easier than removing the old one. I guess the new parts actually want to be here. Alright, with the crankshaft all nice and secured, it is finally time to put the pistons back in. And of course the most important part of this whole project is the fact that I got some new piston rings. But before we place them onto the piston and back into the engine, we're going to measure everything first. The first step's removing the old piston rings. They'll have to come off either way, so there's no need to be overly careful with them. Which is probably a good thing, cause I accidentally break one almost immediately. Now it's time to check the piston ring gap. I do this one ring at a time by placing it into its cylinder and using the piston to push it in nice and straight. For the camera, I'm only pushing the ring in a little bit so you can actually see what I'm doing. When I'm measuring it for real, I push it down further into the cylinder to make sure the reading's accurate. Once the ring's in position, I use a feeder gauge to measure the gap between the two ends of the piston ring. That gap tells me whether the ring's the correct size for this cylinder. If it's too small or too large, it won't seal properly. Alright, all of the piston ring gaps from cylinder 4 are within spec, so that's really nice. But before I place it back, I'm going to measure all of the other gaps and hopefully they're correct as well. But I'm pretty sure, but we're going to check anyway. Engine building's full of jobs like this. It's not particularly difficult, but taking your time now can save you a lot of headaches later on. And yes, if you happen to notice the little red spots on the pistons, that's exactly what you think they are. Turns out piston rings are sharper than they look. Well, nothing a band-aid couldn't fix though. So I decided to put some gloves on after all. I usually avoid wearing them for this kind of work, cause they have an amazing talent for getting caught between piston rings and bearings. But with a bleeding finger, I figured this was probably the smarter choice. According to my measurements, everything's within spec. So that means we're now on to the most scary part in my opinion, and that's to place these piston rings onto the pistons. And normally you'd use a tool for that, but I'm not going to. Before installing the new rings, I like to give everything a generous coat of engine oil. It makes the whole process go a lot smoother. And I know there are special tools for installing piston rings, but I've always preferred doing it by hand. As long as you're careful, I personally find it gives me a bit more control. Once all the rings are installed, I also make sure the ring gaps are positioned according to Honda's workshop manual before the pistons go back into the engine. Got one more thing to unbox for you guys, and that's the new conrod bearings that are again a bit unnecessary, but it's nice to have everything new and fresh again. I know this might seem repetitive, but this is exactly what engine building's all about. Taking your time, repeating the same careful process over and over again until every single part's exactly where it should be. To get the piston back into the engine, I'm using a piston ring compressor. That keeps all the rings nicely compressed while I carefully guide the piston into the cylinder. Then it's just a matter of a few gentle taps with a hammer until it slides into place. Okay, piston number 1's in place, and normally I'd install the end cap right away, but of course we want to measure again using some Plastigauge. So I'm just going to install cylinder piston number 4, yeah, that too, then turn the engine and then measure everything. So that's why I'm not installing the end cap just yet. One thing I do really like about working on this Honda engine is that 2 pistons reach the top of their stroke at the same time. That means I can install the first pair before rotating the crankshaft half a turn to do the remaining 2. After spending most of my time working on 5-cylinder Volvos, it's still something that feels surprisingly satisfying. After flipping the engine over, I first clean the mating surface on the crankshaft before checking the conrod bearing clearances. Just like with the main bearings, I'm using Plastigauge for that. Once everything has been torqued to specification, I can take it apart one more time to check the results. Just like before, the Plastigauge gets flattened, and by comparing it to the reference chart, I can see whether the clearances are exactly where they should be. Everything checks out exactly as it should, which means it's finally time to install these first 2 conrod caps for good before moving on to the remaining pistons. By this point, the process almost becomes second nature. Flip the engine back over, install the remaining pistons, check everything one last time and slowly watch the short block come together. Alright, short blocks all nice and done, and I must say I'm pretty proud of myself. Because when I bought this car back in 2018, I believe, I didn't know anything about cars, let alone about engines and all that kind of stuff. I really did want to learn because I was really interested in cars, and I started by doing just some small things like replacing headlights and that kind of stuff. And then I got way too overconfident and decided to swap the original engine for the engine I'm rebuilding right now, which took me years, even with the help of friends. So that was way too hard for me actually, and ever since then I was really interested in engines and how they work and all that kind of stuff, but like I said, I didn't know anything about it. But it means even more to me that I've now rebuilt the engine of my very first project car. Then I never would have dreamed of doing anything like this, but I'm so proud that I finally did, and I'm sure that 18-year-old me would be super proud of me as well if she could see what I'm doing now. And with the short block done, there's only one more important thing left to do, and that's the cylinder head. Now, last time I was working on the CRX project, my plan was already to rebuild the engine, but because of the lack of time, I couldn't. But I did rebuild the cylinder head already, so I've already grinded in the valves and replaced the valve stem seals. So you would say I don't have to do anything. Well, I do want to replace the valve stem seals once more, just to be sure. I did get the cylinder head resurfaced again too, and I got all of the valves checked and none of them are leaking, of course, because I've grinded them in. So yeah, let's replace the valve stem seals once more. If you're interested in the details of this process, I covered it a lot more extensively during the Ford Focus rebuild. For this project, I'm just going to give you the short version. The valves have to come out before I can remove the valve stem seals. Alright, now it's time to install the first new seal. And fun little fact, you got different seals for the inlet and exhaust side, so you do got to check before installing them, because I've made that mistake before. And then I randomly installed them, and then I found out that there's different colors of springs, because you got a silver one and a black one, and that tells you whether it's inlet or exhaust side, so keep that in mind. With the correct seal selected, I carefully tap it into place using a small socket until it's fully seated. After that, the valve can go straight back where it belongs. Also, I think it's funny because we bought this tool for Volvos, obviously, but Pascal had to tune it for me to make it fit over this cylinder head, and he chopped off a whole lot of the tool, and now it fits perfectly. So now it's also made for a Honda, but I'm really curious what you actually need to use, because you can't use every tool for a Honda cylinder head, obviously, because this one didn't fit. So please let me know if you need a special tool for this. Unlike the last time I rebuilt this cylinder head, I don't have to regrind the valves. All of that was already done during the previous rebuild, and after having the cylinder head resurfaced and checked by the machine shop once more this time, I can simply focus on replacing the valve stem seals. So this time, instead of taking everything apart at once, I'm working on one valve at a time. I remove the valve, replace the seal, put everything back together, and then move on to the next one. It keeps all the parts together, makes it much easier to stay organized, and there's a lot less chance of mixing anything up. The only part that still tests my patience is getting those tiny valve collets back in place. A little bit of Vaseline helps to hold them onto the screwdriver long enough to get them where they need to be, but even then it usually takes a couple of attempts before they finally decide to cooperate. And before I know it, all 16 valve stem seals have been replaced, and with that the entire engine is finally ready to be put back together. Alright, cylinder head's done, short block's done. So now it is time to finally put everything back together and finally get that car back on the road again. But that won't be for this week. So if you want to see how everything continues, please make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. For now, thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you next time. Bye!